Coming up in today's episode of the Conservationists Assemble, I'll be joined by Fiona Sach of ZSL London Zoo as we discuss the world of the Tamaraw. We'll also be talking about the function of the new style remote EEP, and we'll find out how everyone can help ensure a future for the world's smallest buffalo. Welcome to the Conservationists Assemble, the podcast that seeks to unite with Earth's mightiest conservation heroes to raise the profile of our planet's most threatened species by putting the spotlight on the fantastic work of both in situ and ex situ conservation organisations, highlighting the link between them, as well as asking those important questions of what more can and needs to be done. I am your host, Captain Conservation, aka Johnny Bloxham, and I am inviting you to join the ranks of the Conservationists Assemble community as we take the fight to Earth's biggest villain and my arch nemesis, extinction. Will you join the fight? Fiona, thank you for joining us today on the podcast. How's it going?
Hello, good morning. Yes, very well, thank you.
I'm happy to hear that you're doing well. I'm thrilled to be discussing the Tamaraw with you, and I can't wait to hear your thoughts. But before we dive right into our conversation, can you please just introduce yourself to our listeners?
Hello, yes, good morning. My name's Fiona Sach. I'm from the Zoological Society of London, and I'm very fortunate to spend part of my working career working with Tamaraw.
Great. And yeah, I suppose then to prepare us for this episode, could you just please tell us about the Tamaraw?
Yes, so Tamaraw are a dwarf buffalo, the smallest dwarf buffalo found only on the island of Mindoro in the Philippines. They're about a metre tall. They weigh about 300 kilos, and they tend to be sort of dark brown in colour. They have horns that point straight up from the back of their heads. And there are fewer than around 300 individuals left in the whole world. They are endemic only to the island of Mindoro, and they're found in about 3 populations, separate populations on the island. And these populations are completely isolated from each other. So they are critically endangered and desperate need of help and support.
So I suppose they kind of then go against everything we know as a buffalo in terms of being so small and being so few in numbers, because when you see other buffalo species on nature documentaries, these herds covering plains in their thousands. So with them being an island species and being so small, what role do the Tamaraw play in their wider ecosystem?
So I think we need to think that a diverse planet is a healthy planet, and every species matters. We are very conscious to think about every species and the role that every species plays and the diversity that they bring to the ecosystem. And we need to very much think around how we draw a line in the sand to halt human-induced species extinction. Specifically, Tamaraw do shape the landscape. They're herbivorous. They consume grass material, plant material, tree material. So they do shape the landscape in how they graze, and they have a role to play in seed dispersal on the landscape. And they also are very important culturally to the people of Mindoro. There are around 20,000 Indigenous people who live directly alongside the Tamaraw and share their lives with the Tamaraw. And they are an indicator species in that healthy ecosystems, they are a species that indicate healthy ecosystems within the landscape.
It's nice to kind of hear that cultural aspect, I suppose, in terms of people living alongside any species, but
Yes.
obviously in this case the Tamaraw. With the population being as small as it is, what is the current classification and the population trend for this species?
So they're listed as critically endangered on the IUCN Red List. There are no animals at all under human care anywhere in the world, in any zoo or any rescue centre. They're all in the wild on the island of Mindoro. And as I say, listed as critically endangered on the IUCN Red List for threatened species. The population trend is declining. I say there's about 300 individuals. There is a count every year for Tamaraw, and there are a couple of methods that are used to count the Tamaraw. And they are in a perilous state.
In terms of then, trying or understanding the population trend, where are the threats to the Tamaraw coming from?
So Tamaraw are threatened from illegal hunting, poaching. They're also threatened by habitat loss. The areas in which they can live are becoming ever smaller and more fragmented. And they're threatened probably as well by climate change and the environment changing on Mindoro and their habitat changing.
Yes, which I suppose is quite common knowledge now how at risk island species are. So I suppose it's not surprising that necessarily that threat is prevalent for the Tamaraw. In terms of on the ground, obviously, like you've mentioned, there aren't any held in human care outside of Mindoro. Are there any in situ conservation organisation programs for the Tamaraw that exist and that zoos specifically partner up with?
Yes. So Tamaraw are wonderfully supported by a number of organisations. I'll talk about maybe two of them now. So firstly, there is the Dwarf Foundation and Demo Farm Inc., which is a partner that we at ZSL work very closely with, and some other zoos within Europe and America. And they do the most phenomenal job in working to protect and support Tamaraw and the lives of the Indigenous people who live alongside them. And also there is a department within the Philippine government that works solely for Tamaraw conservation, the Tamaraw Conservation Program, TCP, and again, work very hard to protect and support Tamaraw.
Fantastic. So it sounds like there's quite a diverse support system for the Tamaraw in the sense that you've got the three major contributors. What actions are conservation zoos taking to help combat threats to the Tamaraw?
So I think there's a couple of different things here. Firstly, around even just raising the basic awareness of the species. There are many, many people who may have not come across a Tamaraw in their lives before. And so there's lots of opportunities within zoos in Europe and America to tell the story of Tamaraw and to share that with people. And, if we think how many millions of people visit zoos every year, that's a real opportunity to talk to our audiences about this species and raise awareness. Additionally, there are many zoos who are generous supporters of the Dwarf Foundation and of the work of their amazing work, which is hugely important to enable their activities to continue. And then some zoos are involved in other ways. So at ZSL, we are working on a feasibility assessment to very much work with the Philippine government to lay out the options for the way forward for Tamaraw. So very much trying to lay out and articulate the various different things that could be done to protect Tamaraw into the future. And that might involve translocating Tamaraw from areas where there are more to areas where there are fewer. It might involve bringing some animals under human care into a ex situ conservation breeding centre, and it might involve increasing protection of Tamaraw on the ground in Mindoro to protect them. And so we are working through this process, and we're very grateful to receive support from other zoos in this, in terms of expertise from different people, from vets, from curators, from field biologists who are able to support with their assistance as required with this piece of work.
Yeah, it sounds very refreshing and modern to hear that those conversations are being had at a governmental level. That shouldn't be understated, I suppose.
Absolutely. And very much led from within the Philippines. Our feasibility study and our feasibility study team is made up primarily of people in the Philippines, vets in the Philippines, biologists in the field in the Philippines. And it's really, really important that it's being Philippine-led. We're following a process called structured decision-making. So we are trying very hard to apply a process to the science of making a decision, really laying out the fundamental objectives and working through a decision cycle to help with this. This is a conservation decision that is not easy. And when faced with these sometimes difficult and challenging conservation decisions, structured decision-making can help to really lay out the options and help in your thinking towards that. So that's how we're approaching it through the feasibility assessment. And as I say, we're very grateful to the support of the partners and also to some of the zoos who are really helping us as part of that process in various different ways.
And you mentioned how, one of the suggestions, and it may or may not happen, I obviously don't know, but you mentioned how one of the suggestions or options was potentially, bringing some individuals into human care. I suppose that leads nicely into asking you about the function of the current Tamaraw EEP.
And Yes, so just to say, it's very much an option that's being explored. It's not necessarily to be recommended. We're not at that point yet. There have been animals under human care in the past, historically. The last animal passed away during the pandemic. And it's something that if it was to be considered, it would need to be considered very holistically and from a sort of very diverse perspective, and would be on the island of Mindoro. It would certainly not be animals coming off the island. But your question was about the EEP, and I think this is very exciting. The Iaza Tamaraw remote style EEP is a new style of EEP, and it sits in the cattle and camelid tag, and it sort of has, I suppose, four key roles. Firstly is raising awareness of the species, and goes back to the point that I made of how many millions of people visit zoos across the world every day, and the real opportunity that this is to tell a story and expose people to this as a species. And that's really at a very basic level to share the story of Tamaraw with people. And so the EP is one of the roles of the EP is to help people to do that, to connect people maybe through other species that they may have within their zoos, to help them to tell that story of Tamaraw. Secondly, to raise funds. The Dwarf Foundation is quite a small NGO, and any opportunity to support them in raising funds, and we very much see our role as ZSL is how we can support them as our partner to do their Tamaraw conservation. So we do provide share resources, we share expertise, but we are very much trying to help them wherever we can in whatever way possible to achieve their Tamaraw conservation. And so through the EP, there's an opportunity to raise funds through zoos that may want to contribute to a really exciting program, and also an extremely cost-effective program. The environment in Mindoro is such that, small funds go a very long way, building ranger stations, providing protection for Tamaraw. There's a real opportunity for every zoo, however big or small, to contribute in some way and make a real tangible difference on a very long-term basis. It is a very cost-effective program. Thirdly, capacity building. So I mentioned about through the feasibility study, we have been very fortunate to share expertise with some colleagues within European and American zoos who may have translocated other bovid species or may have been involved in certain aspects which are relevant to Tamaraw. And people have been incredibly generous in sharing their time and expertise. And through the EP, that really just provides an opportunity for that to happen. Yes, I'd say they were sort of really the principal roles of the EP. I think it's really exciting that we have a remote style EP whereby Tamaraw will not be under human care within European zoos, and that's not the objective. It's a really different way of looking at things. It's very progressive, and it's really recognizing that zoos have many, many roles, and modern zoos have many roles to play, and this sharing of expertise, sharing of knowledge, and sharing of resources can really make a difference in situ without these animals being in our zoos.
Yeah, it's so progressive, and I suppose it also then it just shows that willingness of zoos, modern conservation zoos, in moving forward and trialing those changes, because there is that mindset of what zoos are based on what zoos once were. In terms of founding this remote style EEP, how did that happen in terms of, comparing it to what we know of as an EEP? Would you say there are any similarities?
I mean, there are similarities in that it sits within the cattle and camelid tag, and there are a couple of other species that have taken a similar approach. The Iaza office have been incredibly supportive, and very helpful in kind of in how they can support the EP and support these new style EPs. So I think it's a really exciting time, and obviously there is still a very need and a role for the more traditional breeding programs where we have managed animals under human care within good zoos. But I think it recognises that zoos don't have to have the species under their care, direct care, to be able to provide support and help. And it recognises that support and assistance can be provided at a multiple of levels. You do not need to take a huge role. You can just take a very modest role as a zoo and provide very modest funding support. And actually, for that funding support, you would still receive a huge sense of involvement in the project and understanding as to the work that's going on, and to be able to make a real difference.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you for kind of just going into a bit more detail, and I'm certainly excited to see where this new style goes. I think it's going to achieve great things, and I think, yeah, it'll be kind of like say a kind of a groundwork for a lot of other species too. So, how can we get other zoos and just everyone in general involved with Tamaraw conservation and kind of get them on the map even more?
I would say, really around sharing and raising awareness of the species, encouraging people. There are some brilliant resources on the Dobobble Foundation's website. There's some brilliant videos that really tell the story of Tamaraw in very short, easy to digest, bite-sized chunks. And I think really how, if people really want to help, they can raise that awareness and tell that story. And think about potential opportunities for raising funds to support the work within that space, really.
Yeah, it's great. And I hope that by the end of this episode, we'll have a lot more people kind of going out of their way to research and use those links. And I know I'll certainly be linking to those resources. So, what was one fact about the Tamaraw that when you first heard it, it really made you appreciate them more? It was kind of a bit of a wow moment for you.
I think for me, what was really amazing is how the organization the partner that we work with, the Dobobble Foundation, it really is amazing how every theme and essence of their work is for Tamaraw to continue living in their environment alongside Indigenous people, and for Indigenous people to continue living their way of life without interference. And there is no artificial or drive to change anyone's livelihood. And I think that's really phenomenal and quite unusual within conservation. And it just was, I think, a really incredible thing that you have 300 animals living in such remote areas, in such a harsh environment, that have adapted so well to the environment in which they live. And it's absolutely beautiful, but it's extremely challenging, the terrain. And that you have these 300 animals living on one island amongst 20,000 Indigenous people.
So then how did ZSL become involved in Tamaraw conservation?
So we became involved prior to the pandemic. We were approached. The feasibility assessment is a part of the Tamaraw Conservation Action Plan, which was developed following the PHVA workshop in 2017. And one of the actions from that was detailed in the Tamaraw Conservation Action Plan, the TC map, to do a feasibility assessment. And I think it's really important to take a moment to think about how important this document is, and it's available online if anyone is interested and would like to have a look. It really lays out the plan for Tamaraw conservation, and every activity and everything that is done is pinned to that. So there is a real direction of travel, and it's a sort of it's a document that evolves and it does change as the needs change, but it's really important that there's a really clear direction and a clear plan that's being consistently followed by all of the partners, by the government, and by everybody. So one of the identified actions within the TC map was to conduct a feasibility assessment. And we were approached to assist with that. And I think then during the pandemic, we were unable to travel and we were unable to really support in any kind of meaningful level. Unfortunately, as everyone I'm sure knows, we all had lots of challenges during a difficult time. But it was something that, at least during that time, we were able to think about, well, what does a feasibility study need to look like? And I think we were able to really refer to a lot of the IUCN best practice guidelines on it, which allowed us to really develop something a lot more meaningful than maybe in the first instance we had envisaged a feasibility assessment to be, and actually think about how we could pin it to the IUCN appropriate conservation transportation guidelines. So that extra time was actually incredibly helpful and allowed us to make maybe better decisions around that. We then recognised that in order to do a feasibility assessment properly, in line with IUCN best practice, we needed some additional resources. And so we applied for a grant, and we're very grateful to the support of Foundation Segre in supporting this work. And we really kind of worked out what that would look like, and the grant is split into the feasibility assessment and also some Tamaraw protection work. And we were really able to kind of start working with DAF remotely because of the restrictions that we were under with the pandemic. And really kind of went from there and thought about how within ZSL we were able to contribute not just from our zoos side, but also from our conservation and policy department and from our Institute of Zoology. And Tamaraw is a really amazing species where all parts of ZSL can come together and work together to achieve more than we would in our own silos. So for us internally, it's an amazing species to be working with because we can bring so many people from across our quite large and diverse organization together to achieve more than we would sort of as small parts. So I think that was really how we became involved. And it was really important to us that we were able to contribute. If we were going to contribute, that we were going to contribute as a collective and provide that expertise that the Institute of Zoology and our conservation and policy teams are able to offer, and that we were able to kind of weave that into our work streams.
That's a really great insight into kind of how these conservation projects come about. It's kind of, I suppose, that little known knowledge of what it takes to do something on a global scale. So in terms of your involvement, do you have any light-hearted stories from your time around the Tamaraw?
So we are very fortunate to spend time with our amazing partners in the field, working with Tamaraw, conducting site assessments. None of it is light-hearted, it's all very serious. But I think you have to bring a little humor into these situations when you are climbing up and down mountains. It's very wet, it's very muddy, it's very leachy,
Oh no.
it's very hot. And so, you do have to bring in some humor to
Yeah.
these situations. We are, as I say, incredibly fortunate to visit landscapes that are absolutely beautiful, and places that are really, really incredible places to go. But yes, the terrain is tough, and there's a lot of sliding around in the mud, a lot of insects, and a lot of kind of wet, sticky weather. So yes, lots of humorous stories from that sort of thing for
Fantastic.
sure.
But I suppose then, it's all worthwhile knowing the bigger picture of what you're there
Absolutely.
for. So Fiona, I think you've given us a great insight into the world of the Tamaraw, and where we're at currently, and kind of what is happening going forward. So now we're going to switch track, and we're just going to focus on your career and your background. So please tell our listeners a bit more about yourself, and just give us an insight into your journey into where you currently are in your career.
So I've been at ZSL for 12 years. I've been very fortunate to work in a diverse range of jobs across ZSL, and they've all been tremendous fun. I graduated from university with an undergraduate in animal science with really no clear direction into what I wanted to do, and really very little understanding into the world of zoos. And I was really fortunate to start at ZSL as an intern, where I worked on animal nutrition, and I was given the most incredible opportunities to learn so much from so many brilliant people about conservation, and kind of really sort of see a direction, and really start to see the sort of role of a modern zoo. I then did a PhD looking at how mineral provision and soil, plants and water influences elephant movement around a mining area in South Africa. I stayed at ZSL during my PhD, but I did my PhD at the University of Nottingham. And that was really phenomenal, and really brilliant project to be involved in. And really thinking about how people living alongside elephants and the challenges that creates for everybody, and how food provision and mineral provision can potentially influence elephant movement around areas of conflict. And I then came back to working full time at the start of the pandemic and moved into fundraising at ZSL, and worked with our trusts and foundations fundraising and looked after our fundraising team. And that was really amazing to get a diverse understanding of the organization and a real diverse understanding of our phenomenal donors who support our work. And then I moved into my current role now in about a year ago, where I work on Tamaraw, as we've spoken about. And then the other species that I work on are almost exactly the opposite. So I look after a program of extinct in the wild species. So these are species which do not exist at all in the wild, only exist under human care in zoos, aquariums, and botanical gardens. And the program really drives the recovery of these species to safe wild habitats. So we have 21 extinct in the wild species that we care for or look after the recovery programs of at ZSL. There are 39 animal species that are extinct in the wild. Many, many more species heading in this direction. And the program really looks at how we recognize that a healthy planet is a diverse planet and that every species matters. And with these species, we are choosing to draw a line in the sand and really look at how we can halt human-induced species extinction to reverse the trend, and for zoos, aquariums, and botanical gardens to meaningfully contribute towards Target 4 on the Global Biodiversity Framework.
Yeah, that certainly sounds like a very diverse career, and you kind of have to be a master of none in that regard. You're just kind of juggling all of these different species with different.
Well, yes, I'm very fortunate that the threads have sort of all linked together. And my PhD was an amazing opportunity to really kind of take stock and pull those threads together. I do still work a little bit with elephants within ZSL, but it was a real kind of chance to focus and pull all of that into one direction of travel.
So then with all of those, those species that you're now kind of involved with, would you say there's a particular species, or going a step further, an individual that you might have gained a particular interest in?
I think Tamaraw is probably one of the most fascinating species to work with, and a real privilege to be able to learn about, because there are few people who even know what a Tamaraw is, and having that kind of chance to learn so much about a species, but also recognize how little is known about a species. As part of this structured decision-making process, we undergo a process called expert elicitation, whereby you gather a group of experts together and you present them with a data pack of all the evidence, and then you ask a series of questions and ask everybody to review the data pack and give their opinions. And it's amazing how little is still known about the species, about the sort of basic ecology of the species, and how many things, how many opportunities there are to find out about their ecology and how they live.
Yeah, because one of the most recent things that we've kind of found out about them is that they were once considered a diurnal animal because there was no predation, but now actually because of human activity we find they're shifted into a more nocturnal ecology.
Absolutely, and it's really interesting. It's to think about, are they shifting because of the environment in which they're in? Are all Tamaraw following that trend, or only Tamaraw that are living closer to humans? There are still Tamaraw living right in the sort of absolute most remotest places, and they, we just wouldn't know what side of the coin they're on. So it's really interesting to see how these things all kind of fit
so
together.
Interesting. And yeah, I suppose then opens up for so much more work to be done, and Absolutely. Look forward to seeing what else we can learn about this fantastic species. So Fiona, would you say that you have a favourite part of your role?
I'm very fortunate that I work alongside phenomenal colleagues within ZSL and more widely within the conservation sector. All of my colleagues are hugely passionate, phenomenally dedicated, and very hardworking people. And working with people like that is a joy because it just makes everything easier. And so I'm very fortunate from that perspective, and also like fantastically interesting people as well. Every single day when you come in to the zoo, you will more often than not meet someone interesting, a new visitor, a new somebody who is working on something, and that is something that's incredibly fortunate to be able to share your career with such passionate and interesting people. We're also incredibly fortunate to, where appropriate, travel to some amazing places. Our international country teams that work around the world at ZSL, but also more broadly to travel to some of these incredible places where these species are living. Sometimes the environments are very harsh, sometimes the conditions are tricky, but it's still a huge privilege to be able to share a little window into those worlds.
Yeah, and on the note of kind of people that you're surrounding yourself with or surrounded by within your career, do you have any people that specifically influenced you or necessarily influenced your career path?
I mean, I would say on a very sort of classic note, David Attenborough. As a child, I grew up watching many of his documentaries and have been fortunate to meet him within the zoo, which has been amazing. I would also say people in zoos are generally very generous with their time, more senior colleagues sharing their expertise, giving advice and guidance. And I think that's something incredibly lucky to have people within ZSL and externally. So I've been very lucky from that perspective.
Yeah, definitely. We're all kind of cut from the same cloth as animal people, and yeah, you've got all the time in the world for those who are willing to learn and share that same passion. So, what advice would you then give to someone looking to pursue a career in conservation?
I would say you've really got to spend, you've got to put yourself out there and have a go and give these things a try and work really, really, really hard and really try. And it can be really scary and it can be really difficult, but to really try and have those conversations with more senior colleagues and ask for advice and ask for their guidance and ask for their help and support and share their thoughts. It's really hard. It's really scary. You feel like no one will want to help you, but actually, I think they've probably been some of the most influential people to my career and to some of the choices I've made. And more often than not, people are very happy to help. So I would say that really horrible and really scary part of putting yourself out there and asking those questions. I would also say the more opportunities you can take to network at meetings and conferences. And again, that can be really, really hard and it can be really difficult and something that I don't think many people feel necessarily comfortable doing. But you will always learn something. You will always think about something differently. I think every meeting you go to, you'll come away with some new idea that you hadn't thought of before. And that's something that's really, really important.
Yeah, there's something very motivating about attending a symposium or a conference. You just come away kind of renewed and refreshed, and yeah, great. Some great advice there. So when did you know that you were at least going to work within conservation?
Gosh, I mean, I think within a couple of months of the internship that I started at ZSL, I thought to myself, this is something I really, really want to do, and this is somewhere I really want to stay. I think the internship was like 6 months or 7 months, and I really thought, okay, how can I, make sure this is something I carry on doing? I then had a series of 6-month fixed-term contracts for a couple of years. And I think sort of during those, every time they got renewed or extended, I thought, yes, this is something I really want to do. And then when I did my PhD, I think that was when I kind of realized, yes, this is definitely an angle I want to take in terms of working within a conservation NGO and kind of how you can use your skills to make a useful difference.
Fantastic. And fast forward in 12 years now, what are some of your proudest achievements to date?
I would say some of the achievements within fundraising are incredibly rewarding when you win grants and win funding support from various sources to enable others to support their work. I think some of that's incredibly exciting. I think some of the work with Tamaraw is incredibly something I'm incredibly proud of and excited, and sort of a bit of a watch this space because there's still an awful lot to do. And I'm personally incredibly proud of my PhD. I look back on it now with hugely rose-tinted glasses, but incredibly proud of the papers that I published and the kind of how those publications have been used down the line. I think that's the thing that really makes you feel proud, when actually someone's taken a method or something that you did and used it again. And I think that's when you feel like it was worth doing, because hopefully it's been useful to somebody else.
Yeah, that sounds like it would be a very kind of rewarding feeling. So
yeah, I think that's when you do feel, I mean, we just published a paper, you don't particularly feel proud, but when you know someone has actually taken that and used it down the line, you think, well, that's actually been worth doing then. I think that's when you feel quite proud. Yeah.
yeah, it's going to have implications on future conservation. Great. Oh, yeah, amazing. Good for you. So, Fiona, I think you've given us a wonderful insight into your background. We're just going to round the conversation up with any dream species that you'd love to work with or see in the wild.
Well, I would absolutely love to see pangolin in the wild. That would be absolutely incredible. When I was doing my PhD, people did see them in the various field study sites, but I never was able to. So that would be one. And actually, I would also really love to see a Tamaraw. I have not yet managed to see one in the wild, or at all, actually, a live one. So I would absolutely love that at some point, when appropriate, to see a Tamaraw.
Fingers crossed that you'll tackle the terrain and one day get to see a live Tamaraw. Yeah, we'll be holding out hope for you. When you're not working, Fiona, how do you keep busy?
I have a wonderful horse that he's getting older now, but he's absolutely wonderful, and very much enjoy riding him. And he has been very consistent throughout, say, my PhD and everything. He's a very good listener. Yeah, he's absolutely great.
What's your horse's name?
Grigio, like the wine.
Shout out to Grigio for being a great listener. Lastly, then, what is one thing you think our listeners should take away from today's episode?
I hope that people can take a real feeling of optimism and hope, and a real feeling of, certainly around Tamaraw, that there's something people could do if they would like to get involved. If you'd like to find out more information, there is a page on the ZSL website on the species, and a page on the project specifically. And additionally, our partners, the Double Foundation, I mentioned, they have a number of resources on their website that people would be very welcome to have a look at, videos and information. So I really would like people to take away a feeling of hope and optimism that there is something that people can do if they would like to, even if it's just talking to their friends and their colleagues about the species, or taking sort of further action.
Fantastic. And yeah, I will link all of those resources in the
Fantastic.
episode show notes.
That would be wonderful.
Yeah, hopefully it will be easy access for all of our listeners.
Excellent, thank you.
Fiona, a massive shout out to you for gracing the podcast with your incredible knowledge and passion on the Tamaraw, keeping us enlightened on how we can all contribute towards their future. We wish you all the support in your career, and we'll be sure to keep up to date with all things Tamaraw and your work with ZSL.
Fantastic, thank you.
A massive thank you to Fiona once again for giving up her time to join us on the podcast today. I really enjoyed chatting with her and learning about some of the modern changes that conservation zoos are embracing to provide a better future for our planet's threatened species. As always, a huge thank you to you, the Conservationists Assemble community, for tuning in and supporting the podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and wish to join the fight to stack the odds in conservation's favour, then please share this episode with your family and friends, and interact with the podcast by sharing your favourite pictures and videos of some of your favourite species. You can also send in your favourite memories from a time at your favourite zoo or experience in nature firsthand, And don't forget, you can have your say by expressing species, organisations or specific guests you would love to see featured on future episodes of the podcast. You can do all of these things by emailing conservationists@outlook.com or by messaging on Facebook and Instagram. Until next time, this is Captain Conservation signing off. Over and out.